To match the heat wave of the dog days of July, we have hot takes, heat checks, and bold takes for the 2025 season. All that and more on Operation Domination.
Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome in to Operation Domination, the full crew in the house. I'm your host, Dan Mader, joined with Adam LaRue and Chase Thornton, and we have hot takes today. I don't know about you guys, but most of the country is sweltering, been melting outside, and hopefully our takes are going to do the same to your face as we get ready for 2025. 1 month away from the Expo, ladies and gents. Make sure you guys come on down. There's still tickets available if you go to thefantasyfootballexpo.com. The Fantasy Football Advice Network is sponsoring the event yet again. Very excited. You'll get to meet us and everybody else from the crew, and of course have a wonderful time too. By the way, Fantasy Football Advice available to you on YouTube along with this show. Just subscribe at FF Advice Net and download Operation Domination Football on your favorite podcast app. So Chase Thornton is going to be leading the way. He's got the shades on. He's ready for the sun, the blaze, and we got some blazing takes for you. So Chase, take it away.
Yeah, that's right. It's midsummer heat check. So here we go. Let's take that. We got the white jersey on for the white hot takes we're going to be having today. I got the sunglasses on. I'm going to take those off because the polarization makes it hell to see on my computer screen here. But yeah, we're going to start it off with a hot take. Okay, each of us is going to give our hottest take of the summer right here on this show, but we're also going to intersperse some heat checks on individual players that we're talking about as we near the start of training camp here later this month. So we're going to start things off with Adam LaRue here. Adam, you've got an interesting take on a player from down south where it is always sweltering hot and muggy and sticky. It hasn't been too bad up here in Wisconsin. It's actually been beautiful for the last week or so, but it is bright. But what is your hottest take of this 2025 midsummer?
Yeah, so maybe this could be a little bit hotter, but my hot take is that Michael Penix, who we've been a fan of him on this show, Michael Penix will be, at this point next summer, a QB1 in Dynasty specifically. So at this point next summer, he will be a top 12 QB. So to put that into perspective, right now, at least on Fantasy Pros, he's right now on Fantasy Pros, he's QB 20, and he has to pass the likes of, like, to at least give it some validity as a hot take. He has to pass a Kyler, he has to pass a Jordan Love, he has to pass Baker, he has to pass Purdy, he has to pass Jared Goff. Like, these are definitely, some legitimate names. Dak, his classmate McCarthy, who I know on this show we're not as high as, but I mean, certainly some people are. Trevor Lawrence, the quote-unquote generational talent. So, yeah, Michael Penix, this point, next season, a top 12 dynasty quarterback. And I'll throw in with it probably a top 20 outright dynasty asset, just kind of given the state of the position and how much it matters. To throw some stats around, 2 of his quarterbacks with a minimum target threshold of like 80, a reasonable amount of targets for starting wide receivers amongst true starting wide receivers who played a majority of the season. 2 of his wide receivers, that would be Drake London, obviously, was towards the top of the league in yards per route run. But also Darnell Mooney kind of hung in there and had a pretty decent 1.88, which is a high-end wide receiver 2 into a low-end wide receiver 1 in terms of yards per route run. And obviously there's other metrics where it gets put more firmly in the wide receiver 2 category. But point being, his top 2 options are pretty good. And he, on his own, was someone who, in terms of big-time throw rate, was extremely high. He's actually had 1 less big-time throw than the likes, 3 less than the quarterback he eventually took the job from, Kirk Cousins, who played 14 games. He had one less than Jameis, who played 9. He had one less than Tua, who played 11. A couple less than Drake May. Like, he was up there for he had 10 big time throws. There's a 9% big time throw rate, which with no minimum, because he didn't play a ton of snaps, but with no minimum, that's second in the league in big time throw rate. He was someone who, look, did he turn the ball over? Yeah, but he wasn't necessarily, if you watch the specific plays, putting the ball in grave danger by any means. I think that the turnovers weren't necessarily completely on him. PFF actually only has him as 2 turnover-worthy plays despite the 3 interceptions. So I think you look at that ratio and you feel really, really good about what Michael Penix is going to be this next season. What he's going to be with, I think Darnell Mooney is an awesome wide receiver 2. I think when he was with Chicago and had to be a wide receiver 1 at points, that was a bit problematic. But I mean, even then, the 1.88 he had last season is his career best, but it's not too far of a departure from early in Chicago when he was kind of operating as their top guy, or as a pretty close to. It really just didn't fall off until his last year or 2 there for Darnell Mooney. So I think that this is who Mooney truly is, and I think this is what London has grown into, and I think that there's still room for London to keep going. We talked last week relatively extensively about Bijan Robinson, what I think about him, what I think about what that can do for this offense. So on the whole, I think it's a pretty complete offense. We'll see about the play calling. I think that can be the biggest part of it, but a young quarterback in his first full season as a starter, if you light it up in that situation, you can easily skip a lot of folks, especially Kyler, who were kind of living on the past anyways. Jordan Love is going to be a tough one to pass, and that's kind of where it becomes, I think, a little bit more difficult. But I think he can jump a lot of these guys fairly quickly.
That's an interesting take. I like that. I like the heat you're bringing with that one. But, I mean, here's the thing. Right now, he's going in for redraft purposes. He's going like in the mid-20s for quarterbacks right now. He's about quarterback 24, somewhere around there. So if he's going to raise his profile that much, I would think he outperforms that draft slot. Do you agree with that or no?
Yeah, I think for redraft, he is at least in the late teens.
Okay. Yeah. And I love what you said there about Darnell Mooney. I would like to point out that we went through an entire discussion there of the Atlanta Falcons offense and quarterback situation without mentioning Mr. Kyle Pitts, because apparently we do not feel like Kyle Pitts is going to have any kind of positive impact on Michael Penix's production. But we talked about Darnell Mooney. You're right. Darnell Mooney, he kind of had that, like, for me, I always go back to calling it the Tyler Lockett syndrome, where he was a little bit boomer bust last year. He was great. Like, in best ball, if you had him, you got some really nice weeks out of him. If you hit on the right weeks and daily with him. But I agree with you that I think Darnell Mooney as a number 2 is a really solid option down there. I like the weapons he has. If they can, keep getting that improved line play from that offensive line down there, I don't think there's any reason that Penix, can't shoot to the moon. I said before, I was glad the Vikings took McCarthy instead of Penix because, I think that bodes well for the Packers. Dan, what's your thoughts there on Mr. Michael Penix, vaulting his draft slot this year and raising his profile in Dynasty for next season?
Well, I'm all on board with it. And just let's put it out there in context, right? Top 12 dynasty quarterback for next season, which means he's going to probably have to perform close to a top 12 quarterback this year, as Adam was kind of laying out. And I definitely see that happening. He didn't get to start the whole year, right? But when he did come in, we saw what we could have hoped to have seen out of him in the sense of, what do you want to see out of rookie quarterbacks? Them be aggressive, right? We don't want to have to coach them up to be aggressive. There was no coaching Michael Penix up to be aggressive. He let it fly right out of the get-go. And dare I say, could he be Jameis Winston without the turnovers? I see a lot of similar skill sets, the way he throws that ball, the way he willing to go downfield, and the offense sets up nicely. Remember, this is the NFC South. We're not facing vaunted defenses week in and week out. So he gets some good matchups there. The Falcons actually have a great schedule this season to make this happen to begin with. Drake London's there. Kyle Pitts is at least an athlete. Teams have to respect it. You want to mention Kyle Pitts at all. But the other point that you made, Adam, was about the coaching staff, about Zach Robinson. And yes, there was, I think when you look at the season as a whole, was there a lot to be desired? Sure. Is there room for improvement? Sure. But we also don't know how much he had to neuter the offense with what was clearly not a fully healthy Kirk Cousins. And I think we get to see that come to fruition. In the Atlanta offense the last 3 weeks, again, Michael Penix, except for the very last game of the year, was not uberly efficient, but the offense as a whole flowed much better because they had the deep threat there available. Bijan Robinson was able to take advantage of that. There wasn't so many stacked boxes because they had to respect that. Michael Penix actually has some mobility to his game too. Now, it's not going to be an X factor in fantasy. Probably maybe 200 yards rushing would be like a top ceiling projection for him roughly, but it does open up the play action boots, which is something Zach Robinson, coming from the Sean McVay system, would like to be able to run more effectively, and play action makes offenses more effective. So it all kind of comes to fruition here. So I'm all about it. I've been big on the Michael Penix talent bandwagon, love it in Atlanta. And I think he's mid-20s, right, Chase? When we get into the season, think about this. How cheap is he going to be for DFS week in and week out until he pops? How often are we going to talk about him being a quarterback waiver claim, streaming option week in and week out, likely, especially with the schedule that they're going to have with what he can do throwing the football? We're going to be talking about Michael Penix a lot during the season, and it all bodes well for Adam's take, so I like it.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring up real quick, too, that a lot of times when we talk dynasty on this show, we're talking super flex, which to me makes it even more ridiculous that he's as low as he is. So, I mean, I don't mean to take some of the heat off of the take, but I agree with you that I think by this time next year, yeah, there's no reason he shouldn't be. And I think he does outplay that mid-20s draft slot there at the quarterback position.
Let me flip that take on its head real quick. If that doesn't happen, if Michael Penix doesn't play up to what we expect him to be able to do, well, then it could actually play the other way. Because he's an older rookie, I could see the Falcons being in position, and they don't have that first round pick next year. It's really going to set up, those teams really well. So it's going to be really dangerous if he doesn't pan out. So they're going to be doing everything they can to build an offense to put him in rhythm.
Right. They don't want to be giving away the farm with that. Yeah. They don't want that first round pick to be a real high one when they don't even get to use it. So
exactly.
All right. Let's move on to a couple of player specific hot takes there. These are just some real quick hitters from guys that we're watching their trends and that we want to talk about. How hot is this guy right now? Dan, you want to kick it off by taking us to, coincidentally, the NFL's second hottest average game day temperature stadium, Raymond James Stadium down there in Tampa, right behind Miami and right ahead of Jacksonville. So yeah, big surprise that 3 Florida teams are the hottest average game day temperatures. I think your team playing in Levi's Stadium is actually, if they still call it Levi's Stadium, is actually the fourth hottest on average. Averaging just under 60 degrees.
That's surprising to me because San Francisco is not usually generally that hot, but it's a little surprising to me.
It's average. But go ahead and give us your takes down there from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? So we wanted a heat check. Somebody's got to heat check the Tampa Bay Bucs backfield a little bit here. So Bucky Irving, from the beginning of May, and we're following, an ADP trend here. And after the draft, that's when I really kind of start to pay attention to what the ADP is looking like. So in the beginning of May, Bucky Irving was around the early 3rd round territory, right? Okay, cool. Like a low end RB1, high end RB2, going in 3rd round, no problems with that. And now he's crept up to where now he's the RB8. He's going the early 2nd round. We're talking borderline 1st round in 12-man leagues, 16th overall on average. And my thing is we need to maybe throw some ice on that just a little bit. I'm not saying Bucky Irving's not a low-end RB1. I'm not saying he shouldn't, his floor isn't a high-end RB2 necessarily. I'm not saying that what we saw out of him last year isn't something to be excited about, right? It was smooth. He had good vision. He was able to elude tackles, everything you look for. And I'll even throw this on there. His 17-game pace from when he started to lead the backfield in week 10, he was on pace for 1,500 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns, 400 receiving yards. That's an RB1, no doubt about it. But you're betting on the idea that Rachaad White has officially become nothing more than a handcuff rather than a rotational player who gets in there a significant amount. I mean, during that time, the split was 58-42 in favor of Irving on carries. And it was a 50-50 target share split. And it was like dead even in targets as far as the rest of the way goes. Irving at 5'10", 195. It's hard to see Tampa Bay, especially during the regular season, wanting to use him as a true bell cow. And I think that's kind of what you're betting on if you're going to draft him at that high of a price tag. And you know what? It tracks. The people are saying that Rachaad White's not going to be anything more than a handcuff because he plummeted from the 9th round to the 11th round currently right now, going running back 42 and 131st overall. So people are banking on the idea that he's going to go away. But as I just laid out the numbers for you, I don't see that necessarily happening. If you want to point to the playoff game against Washington, where Rachaad White didn't play very much, okay. But it's also the playoffs. Teams are going to tend to rely on their very best players more often during that time. It's not the regular season. And with a guy his size, and Irving that is, I don't see him wanting to ride that all the way out. Now, do we have examples of Kyren Williams or Chase Brown or Devon Achane? Yes, we do have examples of smaller backs getting heavier workloads over the last couple of years, but it's still the outlier. It's not the norm. And Chase Brown, Kyren Williams, Devon Achane, they don't have a backup like Rachaad White and what he has already done in this league behind them. People like Jalen Wright, but he hasn't performed to that level. People like the idea of Blake Corum. Chase Brown has two ghosts and a day 3 pick behind him. So to me, I look at them as like they're all very similar players, and yet their situations are very different from Irving's because he actually has Rachaad White, and then some people even still like Sean Tucker behind that in the 3rd string. So I don't see all that coming. Here's another aspect that I think people need to take a closer look at. I'm sick and tired of everyone saying like, well, they moved on from Dave Canales and went to Liam Cohen and the offense was just fine, was great. I think it's creating a little bit of a false perception here. The reason why Davis Canales got pumped up the way he did is because to that point, Baker Mayfield had his best year of his career, right? And as a result, because people didn't know what Baker was or if he could be anything with a first-time play caller that Dave Canales was, well, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and all their ADPs were much lower than what they probably should have been. And then they outperformed them. So people got excited, rightfully so. No problem with that. And then they went to Liam Cohen and it got scorched. But here's the difference. While fantasy-wise for those players were good under Canales and you got more than what you paid for, they were still in the NFL, take fantasy out of it, they were 20th in points scored. They were a below-average scoring team under Dave Canales. They were 4th last year with Liam Cohen. They were an elite offense. So we could talk all we want about how, well, John Grizzard will come in and they've just been striking gold left and right. There's going to be regression on the offensive side. And just to kind of illustrate that point further, Baker Mayfield had 41 passing touchdowns last year. He had never topped 28 previous to that. And we talk all the time on this show, at least I do anyway, that if you're a passing quarterback who doesn't run very often, you usually need 30 passing touchdowns to be considered a top 12 quarterback. He had 41 when his previous high was 28. That's a hell of a jump. There's going to be regression within this offense. Again, I'm not saying Bucky Irving's not worth being looked at as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 type of player, but we're going to be pumping up to RB8, pumping up to a borderline first-round pick, going ahead of guys like Jonathan Taylor, Chase Brown, Kyren Williams. I'm taking all those guys over him. So I think we need to throw a little ice on what's going on in that Tampa Bay backfield.
No, I can't disagree with you at all. I've said many times on this show, we all know I'm kind of a Baker guy anyway, but I've said many times on this show that I loved the marriage there between Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield, and I thought that made things explode for that entire offense last season. You just gave us the numbers to back it up and prove it. Yeah, I agree. Bucky Irving, I love Bucky Irving, and I had him in a lot of places last year. He won me a lot of money last season, to be dead honest with everybody, but Rachaad White did not go anywhere. Liam Cohen did. We're going to have to see what that means for Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Adam, why don't you take us a little bit north of there and give us your heat check for a player right now in this midsummer season?
Yeah, I want to check in on Rashee Rice, who is currently sitting in at wide receiver 16. And I think he's one of, to me, the most interesting values in fantasy football right now because there's just so many questions. So I'm going to break it down. So number one, we'll start with the injury. LCL. He was out for a long time. It's currently the outlook is pretty good. And I think the biggest thing here, and this is something that later in the month we talked to Dr. Brian Scott that we'll circle back to. But from what I understand, which is not nearly as much as he does, the outlook for an LCL in terms of returning to your previous form is much better than the ACL or the Achilles, at least with an isolated one, which it appears from what we've heard that that's the case with him. So that's my understanding of that, not medical professional. So we'll circle back with him. But positive there, right? And what he was doing last season before the injury was spectacular, outright in terms of just receiving grades on the season last season. Obviously, you have to remove the minimums because of he played 4 games. So that has someone like Tay Martin at number 3, right? So it gets a little wonky when you do this. But to beat the minimums, get him in here, Rashee Rice is number 13. He was doing awesome. And in terms of yards per route run, he's not that far behind that same spot. Rashee Rice was putting on an absolute clinic to start the season last season. Now, the problems begin to lie with what's the legal situation. While it seems from most people who talk about it that there is a more than likely chance he will once again skirt away from his repercussions for his actions yet again this season. It seems more than likely, but there's no guarantee. It seems like the NFL will not suspend him until a verdict is reached. There's currently not a trial date set. Therefore, more than likely, nothing will happen. But things can move. You never know. So there is a looming unknown kind of with that there. The other piece is what is going on with this offense. So I talked about how great he was last season. Oh boy, we got Xavier Worthy after that, and Xavier Worthy was operating at the exact same portion of the field, doing a lot of slot work, doing a lot of underneath work. It's very possible that Rashee Rice is kind of a victim to that in a sense and gets pushed to the outside where this is where he made his money in college. But I think a lot of us did have questions about his ability to be an outside perimeter wide receiver coming out of college, that we liked his skill set as an NFL wide receiver, but not necessarily for the exact same role as he played in college. He is kind of someone who lived in that, power slot, great, wasn't a big separator on the outside. It might be tough. We've seen him a little bit on the outside in the pro game, and I think he's good, but I don't know that he is the near elite wide receiver that he has been as a power slot in the slot, kind of where he can be physical and underneath. So I think there's a lot of questions with him. I think that 16 might be a little tough as much as I think the upside. Best case scenario, he can absolutely beat 16. He's certainly capable of it. And if Mahomes wakes up, this offense wakes up, there's a lot of possibility for that. But there's also a lot of possibility that, he's underwhelming if he gets moved to the outside. While the LCL shouldn't remove him, his ability to return to 100%, he still hasn't played in almost a year. So there's certainly some regression from that perspective. There's a lot of questions. Even for someone who is talented, 16 just feels a little dicey for me.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is, they're going to have a full, we assume, healthy season out of Hollywood Brown, a full healthy season out of Isaiah Pacheco again. So that
you're assuming a lot for Hollywood, but okay.
That's assuming, but I'm saying this year they start out, we can relatively assume that, we can't predict injuries, but when Hollywood's on the field, when Isaiah Pacheco is up and that running game is rolling, how does that affect the calculus in that offense as well? Yeah, Rashee Rice feels like one of those. He feels like one of those big swings that if it hits, could really make your season. If you take him too early and he misses though, or he's just mediocre, you could be kind of digging yourself out of a hole from that all season as well. We're going to move back to our hot takes now. We're going to actually pick up on my hottest take of the midsummer season here. This is one that might raise some eyebrows. It kind of raised my eyebrows as well when I started looking into it. But the more I look into it, the more I research it, the more I feel better about this take. I think it's possible here. I'm going to say Bryce Young, quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, finishes this season as a top 12 quarterback points per game fantasy-wise. And I know that it is a bold statement. All right. I've brought it up before. We've talked about him before on this show about how he finished last season. When he came back from that, the early season benching to Andy Dalton, from weeks 8 through 18 last season, he was quarterback 12. There was a marked difference in the play, in his effectiveness. He moved different. He looked like he had figured it out. Okay. Now I don't know that he's ever going to look like a number 1 overall pick, but just look at what he did during those last 10 weeks of last season. And I know that his big week 18 game, he had a big game in week 18, 36-point game. I know that most of us didn't play in week 18. And if you did, you probably didn't have Bryce Young, but most of us didn't have Bryce Young probably starting for us. So if that game had come in week 8 or week 4, it wouldn't have mattered. It does matter when we look at the dude's playing ability. He showed he can do that in a game. I don't think any one of us on this panel would have said we thought that there was a 36-point fantasy game in his arsenal, period. So you look at that last year, weeks 8 through 18, quarterback 12, 15 touchdowns to 6 interceptions and 5 rushing touchdowns. He didn't have a single rushing touchdown the year before. He had 5 in just that little 10-week stretch there. He had 6 200-plus yard games that he threw for. He had 3 20-plus fantasy point games, including, like I said, the one that was over 30. He was a little boomer bust in that regard, but he did have the stats and the counting stats and the fantasy points to back this up. He had 6 games in just that 10-week stretch of an 80-plus passer rating, including the last 3 games where he had a passer rating of over 100. His yards per attempt went up almost a full yard over the season before. And during that stretch, he had a 61.8% completion percentage. Compare that to what he did in 2023 when we all kind of made our snap judgment on him in his first year in the league. 11-10 touchdown to interception ratio. He blew that out of the water in just a little over half a season. 5 200-plus yard passing games. He didn't have a single, I mentioned, rushing touchdown in 2023. He only had 1 20-plus fantasy point game in that year. He had 6 games all season where he had a passer rating of over 80. And his completion percentage for that season was 59.8, under 60%. And I think 60% is the absolute minimum threshold you have to have as an NFL quarterback to be a presentable passer. He raised that this past season. If you look at Josh Allen and what he did the first 2 seasons of his career, I'm not saying Bryce Young is going to become Josh Allen, but Josh Allen, the knock on him coming out of college was that he wasn't an accurate passer. And his first 2 years in the league seemed to back that up. He was 52.8, I believe, for completion percentage. I believe year 2, he was 58.8. So he made that progress. By year 3, he blew 60% out of the water, and he's been remarkably consistent since then. He figured out how to pass in this league. I think Bryce Young is right there on that verge of being able to be that effective passer in this league. Okay. If you extrapolate out what he did in that last half of last season, it looks like a pretty good, dang good season. All right. And I think he can do it. He has another year under his belt now with Xavier Legette. He has Adam Thielen there still as a reliable option. Jatavian Sanders, who they drafted at tight end there. He's got Chuba Hubbard is going to be the running back all year. I assume I expect, I shouldn't say assume, I expect that running game to be a lot better, a lot more consistent with Chuba, just unquestioned talent that is playing in that backfield this year. I'm not worried about Rico Dowdle, but even if Rico Dowdle is in there, I think that running game is going to work. That offensive line is good. And if I told you that a quarterback, if you extrapolate those numbers out from last season, if I told you he was going to throw for 25 or 26 touchdowns this season and 10 interceptions, he was going to run for around 300 yards, probably run for 7 or 8 touchdowns, throw for about 3,800 yards. Does that sound undoable?
Did you say run for 7 or 8 touchdowns?
He ran for 5 in 10 games last year.
Yeah.
He ran for 6 overall last season. He ran for 5 in just that 10-game stretch. If you extrapolate those numbers out, and if he runs for only about 300 yards, if he hits about 7 or 8 touchdowns, he hits 3,800 yards passing, and he hits that 25 touchdown mark, like I said, that, you know what that puts him at? That makes him last year's Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, who were quarterback 11, 12, and 13. And in points per game, it would have made him a top 11 or 10 or 11 quarterback last season, if you extrapolate that out. He's capable of it. I think he figured it out. Now it means he's got to leapfrog a bunch of dudes, but he can do it. He showed it And this year, by the way, they drafted Tedoroa McMillan, who's about 9'8" and can catch anything you want to, chuck up over the top of everybody to him. I like his chances to improve. I say he's got it in him and he can finish as a top 12 quarterback this season. Who's got a rebuttal for me? Because I know there's one coming.
Yeah, I do. Are you done? You're done defending Minnie Mouse? Are you finally done?
Go.
So first of all,
That's terrible.
It's a bold take, so I'm not looking to go hard on you because that's the whole point of taking a bold take, right? It's not going to be a probability conversation that we're talking about. But in order to make what you're saying come true, he's got to face a bottom 25 defense for the majority of the season. So you talk about him being Jekyll and Hyde, even in his good stretch last year. It's a little bit more pronounced than that. He only had 3 games where he finished in the top 12. All 3 of those games, Tampa Bay, Arizona, Atlanta, 3 of the worst defenses in the NFL last season. We played a competent team, 14, 20, 18, 19 guys you don't want in your starting lineup in 12-man leagues, and these weren't bye weeks. These were fantasy playoff weeks, everything else in between. We're also, and this isn't just you, Chase, this is people who are trying to make the case for Bryce Young are extrapolating that last half of the season, that last 6 games of the season. There's a bigger body of work that shows that he wasn't even starting NFL caliber quarterback quality. So we're putting a lot into a little pop at the end of the year where he only had 3 really good games against really poor defenses. Now that's better than what he was doing. I'll give him that much. It was definitely better than he was doing. But you mentioned guys like Xavier Legette, who we still don't know if he's even any good. We mentioned Adam Thielen, who's pretty much rolling out in a wheelchair now at this point. I mean, you're hoping Ted McMillan as the rookie wide receiver is going to break out and be, Drake London-esque basically right off the rip. I don't see this one happening. I think Bryce Young's a type of quarterback where you're not going to get more than 250 rushing yards out of. He did have a pop in rushing touchdowns last season, but I would not project him for 8. And I don't see this as a guy with the arm talent enough to be a 30 or even really the processing enough to be a 30 touchdown plus guy with the weapons around him, which is what I think he would need to be in order to get there. So I don't see it happening, but I understand a bold take when I see one.
Yeah, see, and I've got him not reaching 30 touchdowants. I said, I think he
rushes for 8 though. That would be the key. If he's only going to throw for
20, he rushes for 7, 8 touchdowns. I mean, yeah, that would be a big key, and we know that.
Quarterbacks and rushing. That would be a big key.
Yeah, it would be. But like I said, he had 5 last season in those games. And yeah, he's never going to rank real well, I don't think, in the consistency guide, from Mr. Bob Long there. He's never going to rank real well in that. He's going to continue, I believe, to be boom or bust. But I think that he's going to be able to raise his profile to where he'll be a viable starting quarterback in fantasy, not just a bye week quarterback. I think there's a real possibility that he could raise his profile there. I'm not saying that I would want to take him, but and count on that. I'm generally the guy that jumps on quarterback early. I want Lamar, I want Josh Allen, and I will do that by the 3rd round, 2nd if I feel like I have to, depending on the league. I guarantee there will be at least one league this season, though, at least one where I do wait and pop on a Bryce Young and just see what I can do there. So, okay. All right, let's move on to our player specific heat checks here, and we're going to go with Adam starting this time down in the desert in Arizona. Adam, let's hear what you got to talk about James Conner.
James Conner is another guy who, similar to Rashee Rice, I think has just been one of the more interesting value props, interesting conversations for him. I think it's over the last couple seasons due to, candidly, his age and their investments at the position otherwise. But let's talk about the good with him first. James Conner last season on PFF grades was the number 6 running back. He did so while, he got 50 targets. He had a healthy yards per route run, better than a good handful of other running backs who we consider to be, solid wide receivers. And actually, you want to hear a really crazy one while I'm looking at it right now? He was 0.10, so not 0.1, but 1.1 behind Jahmyr Gibbs. So that is, when you talk about yards per route run, 0.1 is a large number. Let's not get it too out of proportion. But for how we talk about Jahmyr Gibbs being one of, outside of potentially if Christian McCaffrey returns to form, being potentially the best receiving back in the NFL, that's being in that company is still really nice for James Conner. Point being. So James Conner, in terms of talent, in terms of the running back that he is when healthy, which has been admittedly over the last couple of years as he's aged seemingly more than it used to be. But that brings us to kind of the scary part. We're now talking about a running back who is 30 years old. He is actually 30, he turned 30 a month or two ago, actually. So a 30-year-old running back, someone who did early in his season have a significant injury history, someone who through college had around 700 attempts, someone who in his NFL career has been a significant use running back for almost a decade now. Like probably 7-8 years since his second season in the league since 2018. So someone who has a lot of yardage, has a lot of age under his belt, but someone who is still performing really, really well and currently sits in at running back 18. So this is where it gets interesting. So for me, and within context, if you haven't been watching the show for a long time, I was ready to age out James Conner last summer. So this is not coming from a place of bias. If anything, I am biased in the other direction. But I think James Conner is undervalued coming into this season. I'm curious what you guys think, but I think that it's similar to Alvin Kamara, who we talked about a week or two ago, I believe. I think putting him behind guys like Kenneth Walker, for example, I struggle with personally. Even Chuba Hubbard, who we talked about in this last segment, who did have a really good season last season when healthy, behind those guys, I think I struggle with.
Yeah, right now you're getting him, for redraft, you're getting him in a 12-team league right there around the middle of round 5. Right there. And like you just said, some of the other guys that he's ranked next to as running back 18, Omarion Hampton, who is ranked at 20, where there's question there with Najee Harris, but some of the guys in front of him, like you said, Kenneth Walker, there's some question there about can he stay healthy? And there's always the Zach Charbonnet factor, and there's the new quarterback factor and Sam Darnold. I talked about Chuba. I tend to think Chuba's going to have a good season, but can he do it for the full season? Can he be that guy? There's questions on the other guys around him. Joe Mixon, there's questions about Alvin Kamara. I think on this show, we tend to think that Alvin Kamara is going to still be pretty dang good, but there's other guys with questions right around him as well. And I would feel just as good taking him as any of those guys that have questions on him. I would take him probably over Walker right now. So that's a hot enough
something else to throw out there just to hit it. I know that Trey Benson is a part of the concern as well. Look, from my perspective, and I liked, especially as a runner, Trey Benson coming out. I did note the fumble issues, but as a runner, he was really good. Look, at the end of the day, James Conner, over the last couple of seasons, has been one of, if not the best pass blockers in the NFL. So for those reasons, it is going to be extremely hard, even if James Conner isn't necessarily performing at the best, right? Like in terms of your floor with James Conner, he'd have to dip probably below 3.7 yards per carry before he gets benched, just realistically, because of what he adds in the passing game.
Which is why Amari DeMercado is never really going to be an X factor that people try to make him out to be as a third down pass. It may be 2-minute drill, but that'd be about it. No, James Conner is always undervalued because he's always expected to miss half a season, even though the fact is maybe he misses 3 or 4 games before a running back. He's actually pretty relatively healthy over the last few years, 15 games, 13 games, 13 games, 16 games, just the last 4 years. It's really not bad. And he's a bell cow workload. Is it fun to watch? No, not always, but does he always pretty much outplay his ADP? Yeah, he consistently does that almost every single season. So yeah, this is definitely a player who needs a little more heat on him. I'm with you, Adam.
And I will always say about James Conner too, dude beat cancer and then came back and played pro football at a damn high level. I'm not counting that dude out until he's out.
To that point though, hey, look, I think most of his career got this reputation as an injury-prone, bruising running back. He's been extremely explosive and had a lot of breakaway runs the last 2 seasons. This late career spurt where he's just taking crazy long runs with relative ofteness. Like, I don't know where it came from, to be honest with
It
you.
came from Arizona. We saw this in Arizona a number of times. How many times have we seen old guys go to Arizona and somehow find the fountain of youth and look more explosive than they ever were? It's something out in that desert, man. I don't know what it is.
He's been in Arizona for 4 years. In the first year, he had 3.7 yards per carry, and now I expect him to get 4.7. Like,
He
just needed a little more heat. That's it. He just needed a little more of that dry heat.
Well, he needs a lot more heat now, is what I'm saying.
All right. Speaking of somebody that that you got to check the heat on here, Dan, who's your next up here that you want to talk about for a heat check?
It's funny because the guy I'm going to mention is similar in James Conner in the sense of it's not always the most fun to watch, but he needs a little more heat on him because he's been cooling off a little too much, in my opinion. That's Joe Mixon. So we opened up May, right? And he was like about a mid 4th round pick, which felt about right? He's coming up on, getting older, didn't end the season particularly well. And so he's coming about an RB2 in the mid 4th. Now he's going all the way back in the mid 5th. He's the RB18, 52nd overall, when he's coming off a season where he was the RB8 in points per game, when he was 5th in points per snap last year for running backs over 50% snaps for the team. I know recency bias, right or wrong, is very strong in fantasy football. I get it. And when I give you all those great numbers, you can come right back at me and say, well, guess what? In the fantasy football playoffs, when I needed him the most, he didn't even get over 8.1 fantasy points in a half-point PPR league. I understand that. But remember, the guy was dealing with ankle and foot issues by the time that rolled around. The fact that he was RB8 behind the worst offensive line in all of football, I think tells me all we need to know. And what's funny about that is that he actually stayed in line with his career averages. Like his career average is 4.1 yards per carry. Never great, always below average, right? The 4.5 is supposed to be the average of the NFL. He's always been below that. And I know he's turned 29, even though he's felt like he's been post 30 for a decade. But he stayed in line with his. He's not dipping in his efficiency from what we've seen. It's never been his specialty to be an efficient player. What's his specialty? Volume and touchdowns. And I don't see that going anywhere. I'm sorry. I don't subscribe to the idea that day 3 Woody Marks is going to come in there who can't pass block with that team and take over all the passing situations. I'm not buying that Nick Chubb, who frankly, I hope he does for all he's been through, but I think it's a question mark whether or not he even makes this team coming back from that injury. This isn't a simple thing as for Nick Chubb, like, oh, he's a year removed, he'll be able to bounce back. No. This is an older running back with 2 ACL injuries, and this one was more brutal than anything anybody could have ever expected. I'm not subscribing that he's something to steal work from Joe Mixon on a significant level. Volume is the key. This offense is still going to need Joe Mixon to be the guy who falls forward for a few yards to get the offense off on the right track as they get CJ Stroud going again in rhythm with a lot of younger weapons around them. Joe Mixon's never finished 1 year. 1 year he's finished the RB18. Every other season, he's a top 12 running back. I'm not saying for sure I'm projecting him as a top 12 running back this year, but I do think he's going to outperform that ADP. And people might look at the 5th round and be like, well, that's the running back dead zone. The dead zone thing doesn't really exist anymore. And it shouldn't with Joe Mixon. Talk about guys who are going to always outperform that ADP. Mixon's one of them.
I agree completely. He's, like you said, he's one of those guys that you're never really excited about taking. He's more like, oh, well, okay, I guess I'll take him here. And then, like you said, you end up with a top 12 guy every year, even if you didn't take him as a top 12 guy. So, yeah, he's not the most exciting guy to watch. He's not flashy. He has always been a volume guy, like you said. But like you just said, too, all of his numbers last season ranked among his career averages or better, including his fantasy points per game. It was one of his best fantasy seasons that he's had in his career, accounting for the fact that he only played 14 games. Points per game wise, his efficiency numbers per rush and all of that still looked like he can definitely still bring it. And that's going to take us to our last segment here. And Dan, it is your turn here to give us your hottest take of the 2025 offseason as we head into or get ready to head into training camps here. And you are taking us down to the bayou where it is hot. It can get hot and sticky again there in Louisiana. Tell us what your take is here.
Well, I've been defender of this player for forever, and I'm going to die on this hill. This is my do or die year, make it or break it. Chris Olave, the year everyone's falling off of him, is going to finish as a wide receiver 12 this season in 2025. Right now, He's going as wide receiver 35, 71st overall. You can get Chris Olave in the 7th round. Guys, Kellen Moore features as wide receiver 1. CeeDee Lamb and Keenan Allen both had top 5 finishes. A.J. Brown on the most run-heavy offense last season was top 12 in points per game. The lowest number 1 wide receiver Kellen Moore has ever had was Amari Cooper, who finished as wide receiver 21 in 2020. Put that in context, that was also the same season. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup all had over 100 targets that year. They were spreading the ball out. It ain't going to be happening in New Orleans. It ain't going to be happening with Brandon Cooks to Chris Olave. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's getting funneled all the way to Olave. He's going to get utilized all over the formation. That's what Moore does. That's what Olave is great at, which to some degree, as long as it's not Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener, makes him pretty quarterback proof. He's always been an efficient route runner. 2 yard, or always over 2 yards per route. He's typically been a 25% target share player. That puts him right at the low end wide receiver 1 status. I get it. He's coming off a bad year of concussions. We're worried about him from that sense, but he's healthy right now. And maybe Shuck will not throw him as many hospital balls as Derek Carr did last season too. And then maybe that'll kind of help out a little bit. But with Moore's willingness to design an entire offense around his top-notch wide receiver, Shuck, who I expect to start being a rookie quarterback, likely latching on to his number 1 read more times than not, I think the year everyone falls off of Chris Olave is the year he finally finishes as a wide receiver 12, as he'll be coming back from behind in a lot of games and having to throw the ball in the second half.
I think you make a great point here about, the Kellen Moore system coming in and him being a lockdown target for a rookie quarterback. And I think that rookie quarterback is playing into a lot of people's fears here as well. It's not just the idea of him coming off the injury. It's not just the idea that, he's prone to concussion, getting out of bed in the morning. It's the fact, it is going to be Tyler Shuck, or it's going to be Spencer Rattler. Jake Haener is, there and getting a paycheck, I guess. But I think a lot of people are scared off by that whole idea as well, without really looking at, like you said, the career context of Kellen Moore and his history with receivers and good players. What do you make of the idea, though? I mean, with Alvin Kamara still there, Alvin Kamara is still the engine that makes that offense go. I think he still is.
Alvin Kamara is not enough to funnel anything away. Because you still have because it's Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara. What else do you really have? Juwan Johnson's cute. That's about it. Brandon Cooks is toast. Rashid Shaheed, we only saw him pop a Kubiak. He's not going to be running that same system. I'm not buying into that one. So it's going to be funneled to your 2 top players.
Mm-hmm. All right. And again, playing devil's advocate here a little bit, because I agree with you. I love Chris Olave's skill set. I hope to gosh he's not Tua concussion wise, but we hope nobody is. Again, his second season in the league, though, that was his best fantasy season of the 3 he's had on a points per game basis, 11.7 half PPR points per game. That puts you that's low RB or low wide receiver 2 numbers. He's going to have to blow away his best year. I mean, and again, it's 3 years. It's a small sample, and it's not even 3 years because of the injuries that he's had and been out in the games that he's played. But he's going to have to blow that away to rise up there. You see it happening under Kellen Moore. You see it happening this year. I don't doubt that he's got it in him, because I agree with you. I love his skill set. But Adam, first off, Dan, do you have any rebuttal to that? But then Adam, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Dan's take here and what you think of Chris Olave's chances for coming into his own finally this year as a wide receiver 1 that we all drafted him as in Dynasty. Go ahead, Dan, first off. Do you have anything to...
No, I don't have anything to add to that other than players are going to look at the breakout at some point. He's had to deal with Derek Carr the past couple of seasons, inept offensive play calling, in my opinion, the last couple of seasons. And the biggest thing has been the touchdowns. He gets featured the way he does in Kellen Moore's system. Kellen Moore gets his guys touchdowns. And we could be looking at Chris Olave going from a 25% to a 29% target share, which is what he's usually done for his top-notch wide receivers. Go ahead, Adam.
There we go. Yeah, go ahead. Go for it, Adam.
I think 12 is tough. I can see an improvement. I think he's a great value at wide receiver 30. Like, are you? Yeah. Like, at cost, he's awesome. I think 12 is a bit rich for me. I think he is more so like a mid 2. In in the spirit of the take, I'm with you. In the definition, I'm not quite there. I think that there's too many things that need to break his way. I think, has to stay healthy, has to make that jump. You kind of need Chuck to be better than Derek Carr at minimum, which I think I like Chuck. I think a little bit above average, a little bit more than average, but I think Derek Carr is actually probably a good comparison. I think about that level is probably pretty reasonable. So there's just a lot of things that need to break the right way. I think some of them will. I just don't know if you're going to, completely strike out.
Well, and with where he's going, I mean, you can kind of sum up this hot take in one succinct sentence here. At where he's going in drafts, Dan says Chris Olave is a league winner type this season. He's going to have to way outperform that. And if he does hit for you, like Dan claims he's going to, and Dan is, right about a lot of things on this show, Chris Olave translates to a league winner. That's a pretty hot take, but it's one that we've all seen the ability. We know he has that ability. It's can he stay healthy and can he operate within that offensive system in order to reach the heights of his capabilities there.
And that's why it's a bold take, ladies and gents. We got anything else real quick, Chase, or no, we're good?
No, just everybody out there, stay cool wherever you are. And let's hope that it's a good continuing summer here in the heat.
Well, continuing summer, we're getting real close to training camp, and that's going to be next week for two teams heading to the Hall of Fame. So that's why we're going to talk about some training camp battles to look out for and that we're interested in heading into this deeper diver summer. Make sure you guys check out Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app and subscribe on the YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. It's going to be a hot one. Stay cool. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.